"Let your lineage sprout in me," said Apache women. The rancher let her stay. The sun was just beginning to sink behind the distant mesas, painting the Arizona plains in shades of gold and orange. The air was warm but carried the subtle chill of an approaching evening. Samuel Carter, a man in his early 40s, stood by the fence of his ranch, wiping the sweat from his brow with a faded handkerchief. He had been tending to the cattle all day, making sure each animal was healthy, feeding them, and checking the fences for any breaks. The land was his life. He had inherited it from his father, who had inherited it from his father before him, and he knew every inch of it like the back of his hand. The ranch was not just land, it was history, legacy, and pride. Yet, over the years, Samuel had learned to live quietly, with only the animals and the wide-open sky for company. It was during one of these quiet evenings that something unusual happened. Samuel noticed a figure at the edge of the property, moving slowly along the path that led to his house. At first he thought it was one of the wandering travelers who occasionally passed through, looking for a place to rest for the night. But as the figure came closer, Samuel could see it was a woman. She moved with a calm, deliberate grace, carrying only a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Her hair was dark, braided carefully, and her eyes were steady, alert, and strangely familiar, as if she had known hardship but carried her dignity like a shield. Samuel felt a twinge of unease. He had been alone for many years and was not used to strangers arriving unannounced. His hand instinctively went to the handle of the old revolver at his side, though he knew he would probably never need it. Still, caution was a habit ingrained from years of living on the frontier. He called out, his voice firm but not harsh. "Who's there?" The woman paused a few steps away from the fence. Her eyes met his, and she gave a small, respectful nod. "My name is Ayoka," she said softly, her voice carrying a rhythm that reminded Samuel of the wind rustling through the dry grass.
"I'm looking for a place to stay, for a short while. I mean no trouble." Samuel studied her carefully.
Despair. He had seen travelers before, some with genuine intentions, others with less honest ones. Something about Ayokata was different. There was no fear in her eyes, no attempt to hide. She seemed confident, yet humble, aware of the world but not afraid of it. "I don't usually have strangers on my land," Samuel said cautiously, his tone firm but curious. "Why are you here?"
Ayoka adjusted the bundle she carried and took a small step closer, careful to respect the invisible boundary of the fence.
"I am searching for a place where I can live safely, even if only for a little while," she explained. "I carry my people's stories with me, and I wish to honor the land while I stay." Samuel blinked. Her words were unusual, even poetic. "Most travelers would not speak of stories or honor. They would speak of hunger, work, or money." Her words stirred something he could not immediately understand, something deep and old, like the whisper of the wind across the plains. He hesitated. The ranch was his world, and strangers were unpredictable. But he also remembered the lessons his father had taught him. Courage was not only in fighting danger, but also in trusting wisely when it was deserved. Something told him that this woman was not a threat.
"You can stay for the night," he said finally.
"But you must follow my rules. You respect my land and my animals, and in return you will have shelter and food." Ayoka's eyes brightened with gratitude. "Thank you," she said simply. It was not a loud or dramatic thank you, but there was a sincerity in it that made Samuel lower his guard slightly. That night, she followed him to the small house near the ranch's center. It was modest, with simple wooden walls and a fireplace that had seen countless winters. Samuel prepared a meal of beans, bread, and roasted meat. Ayoka accepted it with a quiet nod, sitting at the wooden table, her hands folded in her lap, her sadness and a sense of love. As they ate, she shared a little about herself. Not in great detail, but enough for Samuel to understand that she had roots that ran deep into the lands of the Apache people. She spoke of her ancestors, the traditions she had grown up with, and her journey across the plains to find a place where she could continue living respectfully in harmony with the land. Samuel listened, surprised at how much he wanted to hear. He had lived in silence for so long that the sound of another human voice, thoughtful and deliberate, felt both comforting and intriguing. He told her about the ranch, how it had been in his family for generations, the struggles and triumphs that came with tending the land, and the loneliness that often accompanied such a life. Ahioka did not interrupt or judge. She listened with patience and understanding, asking questions at the right moments, not out of curiosity alone, but out of genuine interest. Samuel felt a strange warmth in the presence of someone who could understand both the hardships and the beauty of life in these wide-open plains. After the meal, as the fire crackled in the hearth, they sat in silence for a while, each lost in thought. Samuel wondered if he had made the right decision in letting her stay. The world was unpredictable, and letting someone into his life, even temporarily, was a risk. But he also felt an inexplicable sense of calm, as if her arrival had been meant to be. Ahioka finally spoke, her voice soft in the dim light.
I do not seek to replace anyone or disrupt your life.
I only ask to be allowed to live here, to learn from the land, and perhaps in return offer something that will endure beyond my presence. Samuel studied her face, seeing the honesty reflected in her dark eyes. He realized that perhaps this encounter was more than chance. It was an opportunity, a new chapter he had not expected to open. He nodded slowly. You may stay, he said, but understand, this land has rules, and so do I. You must follow them if you are to remain. Ahioka smiled faintly, a smile that was quiet but full of strength and promise. I will, she promised. That night, as Samuel lay in bed listening to the wind whistle across the plains, he thought of the woman who had appeared at the edge of his property. There was something about her that felt timeless, rooted in both the past and the future. He did not yet know how this chance meeting would change his life, but he had a feeling that it would. Outside, the stars began to emerge, bright and steady against the deep blue sky. The plains were silent, except for the distant lowing of cattle and the occasional call of a night bird. Samuel felt a sense of connection to the world around him, to the land he had inherited, and to the stranger who now shared it with him, even if only temporarily. In the days that followed, he would come to understand that letting someone into his life required courage equal to the courage he had learned on the plains. He would learn that trust, once given, could grow into something remarkable. And he would learn that sometimes a life that seemed quiet and complete could expand in ways that were unimaginable, simply by opening the door to another soul. But for now, he allowed himself to rest, feeling the first gentle stirrings of change in the stillness of the evening. Ahioka, too, settled into the small room she had been given, feeling the security and respect of being in a place where she could honor her traditions and live freely. Together, though still strangers, they shared the beginning of a story that neither could yet fully see. A story that would intertwine their lives, their legacies, and the land itself in ways neither could have predicted. The night deepened, and with it, a quiet understanding settled between them. The ranch, the plains, and the stars above seemed to witness the start of something new, something rooted in respect, trust, and the promise of shared journeys. And somewhere deep within Samuel's chest, a small but undeniable spark of hope began to grow, hinting that the arrival of Ahioka was the first step in a life that would never be the same again. The next morning, the first rays of sunlight stretched across the vast plains, warming the earth and glinting off the tips of the tall, dry grasses. Samuel Carter rose early, as he always did, stepping onto the porch of his modest ranch house. The smell of fresh air, mixed with the faint scent of the cattle pens, greeted him. He had spent years establishing routines that made his life simple and predictable. Yet today, the world felt slightly different. The presence of Ahioka had shifted something within him, though he couldn't yet name it. Ahioka was already outside, kneeling near a small patch of wildflowers at the edge of the yard. She ran her fingers lightly over the petals, as though paying silent respect to each plant. Samuel watched her quietly from a distance. She moved with care and intention, yet there was an ease in her movements, as if she had belonged to the land her entire life. It struck him that she treated everything, every stone, every blade of grass, every small insect, with respect. There was something calming about watching her, as if her presence made the ranch feel more alive. Finally, Samuel stepped down from the porch. "Morning," he said, his voice still a little cautious, but more relaxed than yesterday. "Good morning," Ahioka replied, looking up and offering a gentle nod. Her dark eyes sparkled in the sunlight, reflecting a quiet confidence. "It's a good morning," she added, "and I hope it will be a good day for you too." Samuel smiled faintly. There was something in her words, simple yet sincere, that made him feel unexpectedly seen.
It will be,
he said, though he wasn't entirely sure if it would. The day had just begun, and the ranch always demanded attention.
Dispatched. He gestured toward the barn. "We have work to do," he said. "The cattle need feeding, the fences need checking, and the horses need grooming. I hope you are ready to help." "I am ready," she said, standing and brushing off her clothes. "I wish to learn your ways as well as share mine."
Perhaps together we can care for this land more fully. Samuel was intrigued.
Most people who passed through the area were interested only in survival or convenience. They rarely spoke of learning, respect, or the land itself. Breath. Yet here was someone offering to walk beside him in partnership, not simply to take what she could or ask for help. He found himself feeling a mixture of surprise and admiration. As they began their work, Samuel noticed how observant Ahioka was. She did not rush, and she did not complain. She watched the cattle calmly, noting which ones seemed restless or tired. She inspected the fences carefully, sometimes kneeling to examine the wood for signs of weakness. She handled the horses gently, speaking to them in a soft, low tone that seemed to soothe even the most skittish of the animals. "You have a way with them," Samuel said after a while, pausing to catch his breath in the warm morning sun. "I've raised animals my whole life, and yet you seem to understand them almost instantly." "Respect is key," she replied. "Animals, like people, respond to patience and kindness. Desperas. Force only breeds fear. Trust is stronger than control." Samuel nodded slowly, reflecting on her words. There was wisdom in her approach, wisdom that reminded him of the old lessons his father had tried to teach him long ago, but which he had sometimes forgotten in the rush of work and survival. As the day continued, Samuel began to open up more. He told Ahioka stories about the ranch, about the hardships of droughts and harsh winters, about moments of triumph when the cattle were healthy and the land produced more than expected. He spoke of his father and grandfather who had taught him not only the skills of ranching but also the importance of integrity, patience, and respect for the land.
Ahioka listened with intent, her expression calm and thoughtful.
She asked questions, not out of curiosity alone but from genuine interest in understanding the world Samuel inhabited. "How did your father teach you?" she asked. "Was it only through work, or through stories as well?" "Both," Samuel admitted. "Work teaches the hands, stories teach the heart. My father would say that if you care for the land with your hands but ignore the lessons it carries, you have not truly lived. He believed the land and the family were intertwined, and that understanding one helped you honor the other." Ahioka's eyes softened. That is similar to how we were taught, she said. We are told that the land carries the memory of those who came before. To care for it is to honor them. To listen to it is to hear their wisdom. For a moment, Samuel felt a deep connection to her words. Here was someone who, despite coming from a different culture and background, shared a belief that resonated with him deeply. They were both caretakers of history, of land, of life. And though they had just met, there was a sense that their paths had crossed for a reason. By noon, the sun hung high and hot in the sky. Samuel invited Ahioka to rest in the shade of the house, and they shared a simple lunch of bread, cheese, and cold water. Ahioka spoke little, but her presence was calming. Samuel realized that he had spent many days eating alone, thinking only of the next task or chore, and yet now, with someone quietly sharing the space, the meal felt richer, fuller. After lunch, they returned to work, this time focusing on repairing a section of fence that had been damaged in a recent windstorm. Samuel handed Ahioka tools and explained the proper way to secure the posts and wire. She listened carefully, following his instructions with precision, but also offering suggestions based on her own experiences.
I am one of these buys that I can determine that I can find.
You might want to tie this knot a little differently, she said, demonstrating a method that kept the wire tight while putting less strain on the wooden post. Brett, it is a technique my people use to preserve wood and prevent it from splitting. Samuel studied her hands as she worked, noting how skilled and careful she was. He had learned much over the years, yet here was someone teaching him something new, and he felt an unexpected thrill in learning again. It was a reminder that no matter how long you had lived, there was always more to discover. As the afternoon faded into early evening, Samuel began to realize how much easier the day had passed with Ahioka's presence. The work was still hard, the sun still harsh, but there was a rhythm, a balance that made everything feel lighter. For the first time in years, he felt that the ranch was not just his responsibility but a shared space, capable of growing and thriving with help from another. Later, they walked along the edge of the property, watching the cattle graze in the fading light. Brish. The plains stretched endlessly before them, golden and quiet. Ahioka paused and knelt beside a small cluster of wildflowers, tracing her fingers over the petals with care. The land has stories, she said softly, almost to herself. Every plant, every animal, every stone carries memory. To walk here is to be part of that story, even if only for a moment. He had always felt the weight of his family's legacy, but he had never thought of the land itself as part of that legacy. Now, hearing her speak, he realized that the ranch was more than a piece of property. It was alive with history, with meaning, and with potential.
You are wise, he said finally, breaking the silence.
I have lived here all my life, and yet you have reminded me to see it differently. Ahioka smiled faintly, her eyes reflecting the last rays of the sun. Wisdom is not just in age or experience, she said, brings. It is in listening, observing, and understanding. You have lived here, and you know the land. I only help you hear it in a new way. That evening, after the work was done and the animals fed, they returned to the small house. Samuel began preparing a simple meal while Ahioka tended the fire and cleaned the tools they had used. Their movements were quiet and efficient, a rhythm that had begun naturally, without much speaking. As they ate, the room filled with the warm glow of the fire. Samuel felt a quiet contentment he had not experienced in many years. There was a connection forming here, delicate but strong, built on respect, work, and shared understanding. He realized that letting Ahioka stay had not only been the right decision but perhaps the beginning of something transformative. As night fell and the stars began to shimmer above the plains, Samuel looked out the window at the endless horizon. He felt a sense of hope and anticipation. The ranch, the land, and even his own life were opening in new ways. And at the center of this change was Ayoka, the woman who had arrived quietly, carrying only a bundle, yet bringing with her the possibility of something extraordinary. He did not yet know the full impact she would have on his life, but he knew one thing for certain. The days ahead would be different, and for the first time in a long while, Samuel felt eager for tomorrow. Days turned into weeks, and life on the ranch began to settle into a new rhythm. Samuel and Ahioka worked side by side, tending to the cattle, repairing fences, and maintaining the land. The work was hard, as it always had been, but there was now a quiet energy that made the days feel lighter. Samuel had always been a solitary man, used to relying only on himself, but he had begun to realize that having someone like Ayoka around did not diminish his strength. It amplified it. Yet, even as their bond grew stronger, life outside the ranch began to stir with whispers and judgments. People in the nearby town had started to notice the Apache woman living on Samuel's property. Some were curious, some indifferent, but a few were skeptical or even disapproving. Rumors spread quietly at first, then more openly. "Why would Samuel let a stranger live on his land?" a neighbor asked one afternoon, leaning on a fence post. "She's Apache, and she's not family." "What is he thinking? It's dangerous, isn't it? You don't know who's coming into your life." The world isn't always kind to strangers, and certainly not to women wandering alone. Samuel heard these words as he passed through town to collect supplies, and for the first time, he felt the weight of their opinions pressing on him. He had always valued his independence and quiet life, and suddenly he realized that others were questioning not only his judgment, but the very choices that had allowed his life to feel meaningful and complete.
He returned to the ranch, thoughtful and tense.
Hey. Ahioka was waiting, as always, by the barn, tending to the animals. She noticed the shadow in his eyes immediately. "But what troubles you?" she asked softly, setting down the bucket of water she had been carrying. Samuel hesitated. He was not used to discussing the opinions of others with anyone, but with Ahioka he felt a rare trust. "People are talking," he said finally. "They wonder why I let you stay, why I trust you."
They think it is foolish. Ahioka listened, her expression calm but understanding.
"People often fear what they do not understand," she said. "Their words reflect their fears, not your choices. What matters is what you know to be true in your heart." Her words struck him deeply. He had expected judgment from the outside world, yet hearing her put it so simply made him realize that he did not need to justify his decisions. He had chosen to trust her because it felt right, because she had proven herself reliable, kind, and wise. That alone was reason enough. Even so, the whispers of the townspeople began to weigh on him, subtly. Indispensable was a man who valued independence, and yet he could not completely ignore the reality that he lived in a community where reputation mattered. He wrestled with a mixture of pride and caution. How could he protect both his land and his integrity while keeping Ayoka safe from those who might not understand her presence? One evening, as the sun dipped low in the sky and painted the plains in fiery orange and crimson, Ayoka spoke words that surprised him. They had been sitting quietly on the porch, watching the horizon. "Samuel," she said, her voice gentle but firm, "I wish to tell you something important." "Go on," he said. She took a deep breath, her dark eyes meeting his. "Let your lineage sprout in me." The words struck Samuel with a force he had not anticipated. He blinked, unsure if he had heard correctly. What do you mean?" he asked, his voice low.
Hyoka's expression was serene, unwavering.
I mean that the wisdom, stories, and values of your family, your lineage, can live on through me. I am not here to replace anyone or to take anything from you. I am here to learn, to honor, and to continue the lessons that your ancestors have carried for generations. Your legacy can grow, even in ways you may not yet see. Bert. Samuel sat back, taking in her words. It was a profound statement, one that carried more weight than anything anyone had ever said to him. It was not just an offer of trust or partnership. It was a declaration of respect and understanding, of connection across generations and cultures. He felt a mixture of awe, gratitude, and something he could only describe as hope. But you mean that you would carry my family's stories, my traditions? He asked, his voice soft with wonder.
Yes, Ahioka replied simply, not in the way blood carries it, but in the way heart and action carry it.
What you value, what you have worked for, what you have taught me through these days, all of it can continue, even as life moves forward. That is the gift I offer. Samuel was silent for a long time, the wind rustling softly through the dry grasses around them. He realized that he had never truly considered how much he wanted his work, his land, and his family's values to endure beyond his own life. And now, someone had offered to help him do exactly that. From that moment, a new level of trust grew between them. But Samuel began to see Ahioka not just as a helper on the ranch, but as a partner in life, in work, and in legacy. He realized that trust was not about ignoring risk or danger, it was about recognizing the good in someone and choosing to nurture it. Yet, even as trust deepened, challenges arose. One afternoon, while they were repairing a section of the fence near the northern pasture, a group of neighbors rode by on horseback. They slowed as they approached, exchanging wary glances, and then one of them called out, "Samuel, what's this I hear about a woman living on your ranch?" Bait. You letting strangers take over your land now? Samuel straightened, feeling a flicker of anger at the accusation, but he kept his voice calm. She is not taking over anything, Ration. She is helping me care for the ranch, as she has done every day since she arrived. That is all. The neighbors exchanged uncertain looks. Still, one muttered, "It's unusual."
We just hope you know what you're doing.
Samuel nodded without argument. I do. Thank you for your concern, he said, turning back to his work. Ahioka watched silently, sensing his tension, but also understanding that these moments were part of life in a small community. Brown. Let them talk, she said gently once the neighbors had gone. Their words cannot change what is real here on this land. What matters is what we do, not what they think. Her calm wisdom reminded Samuel of the lessons he had learned from his father. The opinions of others are fleeting, but integrity and action endure. With her presence, he felt strengthened in ways he had never imagined. In the following days, Samuel began to notice subtle changes in himself. He laughed more easily, felt more patient with the animals, and approached the work with renewed energy. Hyoka's influence was gentle but undeniable. Great. She did not force her beliefs on him, nor did she demand attention or recognition. Instead, she led by example, showing care, respect, and thoughtfulness in every action. He also noticed that Ahioka had a unique ability to see things he had missed for years. She would point out small details about the land, the cattle, or the weather, offering insights that often saved him time and effort. It was as though she had a deeper connection to the rhythm of life on the ranch, a perspective that complemented his own experience and knowledge. One evening, after a long day of work, Samuel and Ahioka sat by the fire outside, watching the stars emerge in the clear night sky. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with mutual respect and understanding. Samuel realized that he had begun to rely on her presence not only for practical help, but also for companionship, for wisdom, and for the quiet assurance that someone understood him completely. Ahioka broke the silence, her voice soft and thoughtful. "Trust is a fragile thing," she said. "It must be earned, respected, and protected. But once it grows, it can carry more than you ever imagined. More than one life, even more than one family. It can carry stories, values, and love beyond what you see." Her words resonated deeply. He understood now that allowing her to stay, trusting her completely, was not a risk. It was an investment in the future, in the land, and in something far greater than either of them alone. That night, as the plains felt quiet under the moonlight, Samuel felt a sense of peace he had not known in years. The challenges of judgment, skepticism, and uncertainty remained, but he knew that together he and Ahioka could face them. Their partnership was more than convenience. It was a bond built on respect, understanding, and shared purpose. And in the quiet of the night, under the endless stars, Samuel understood the depth of her words. "Let your lineage sprout in me." It was no longer just a statement, it was a promise, one that he was ready to accept, cherish, and nurture. The months passed, and the ranch seemed to breathe with new life. Spring had arrived in full force, and the plains were dotted with green shoots, small wildflowers, and the first hints of fresh growth after the long winter. Samuel and Ahioka had settled into a rhythm that balanced work and quiet moments of reflection. Their partnership had become natural, flowing as easily as the river that cut through the distant valley. Breaths. Samuel had always been proud of his independence, yet he had come to realize that sharing the land with Ahioka made everything more meaningful. Her presence brought not only help with the work, but also a renewed perspective on life itself. She treated every task with care, whether mending fences, feeding the animals, or tending the small garden they had planted together near the house. Her hands moved with skill, her attention to detail remarkable, and her respect for the land inspiring. One morning, as the sun rose and painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, Samuel found Ahioka at the garden kneeling to tend the soil. The small patch was a mix of vegetables, herbs, and flowers, each plant carefully chosen for its resilience and usefulness. She worked with quiet patience, turning the soil gently, planting seeds with deliberate care, and speaking softly to the plants. Samuel watched her from the porch, feeling a sense of admiration and wonder. "But you have a gift," he said, stepping closer. "Not just with the animals, but with the land itself. Everything you touch seems to thrive."
Ahioka looked up and smiled faintly. "The land is always ready to grow," she replied.
"It only needs care, respect, and attention. You have done well, Samuel. You already know how to listen to it. I only help you see what is sometimes hidden." Samuel nodded, reflecting on her words. He had spent years tending the ranch, yet there were lessons he had yet to learn. Her presence reminded him that knowledge was not static, and that there was always room to grow, no matter how experienced one might be. As the days turned warmer, they began to work on improving the ranch further. Samuel had always relied on traditional methods, but Ahioka introduced ideas inspired by the ways her ancestors had cared for the land. She suggested planting small patches of native herbs to enrich the soil, creating shaded areas for the cattle to rest during the hottest parts of the day, and using natural methods to encourage plants and animals to coexist more harmoniously. Samuel was skeptical at first, but as they experimented and observed, he noticed the results almost immediately. The soil became richer, the cattle calmer, and the land more productive. He began to understand that her wisdom was not just theoretical. It was practical, tested over generations, and perfectly suited to the harsh realities of the plains. Their bond deepened beyond work. One evening, as they walked along a narrow path leading to a small stream, Ahioka paused to admire the reflection of the setting sun in the water. "Samuel," she said softly, "do you ever wonder why some people resist change, even when it could help them?" Samuel considered her question, looking at the water and the soft ripples created by the wind. "I suppose it's fear," he said finally.
People are afraid of losing what they know, even if what they know is not perfect. Change is uncomfortable, and comfort often feels safer than progress.
Ahioka nodded. That is true. But sometimes the right change, guided by respect and care, can create harmony. It can bring life to places that were once stagnant. Samuel felt a quiet understanding settle over him. He realized that their work together was not just improving the ranch, it was creating a new way of living, one that balanced tradition and innovation, patience and action. Together, they were building something stronger than the sum of their individual efforts. As the weeks passed, the townspeople began to notice the transformation as well. Whispers of skepticism gave way to quiet admiration. The ranch, once ordinary, now thrived with vibrant gardens, healthy cattle, and well-maintained fences. People began to visit occasionally, curious about the changes, and Samuel found himself explaining some of the methods they had used. Ahioka always remained humble, offering insights with a quiet confidence that drew respect rather than attention. One afternoon, as they were repairing a section of fence near the northern pasture, a young boy from the town approached. He had watched the work for several days and finally mustered the courage to speak.
Mr.
"Carter," he said hesitantly. "I've never seen the ranch look like this before. How do you do it?"
Samuel smiled, glancing at Ahioka, who gave a small nod of encouragement.
"It takes patience, care, and learning from those who know the land," he said. "Sometimes we work together, sometimes we listen to the land itself. And we never stop paying attention." The boy nodded slowly, absorbing the lesson. "Desk."
"Can I help sometime?" he asked. "Of course," Samuel said warmly.
"There is always work to do, and the land always needs care." Ahioka knelt to show the boy how to tie a knot properly and how to check the soil for signs of dryness. The boy's face lit up with excitement as he learned, and Samuel felt a quiet pride in witnessing the passing of knowledge to the next generation.
It reminded him of the promise Ahioka had made, to carry forward legacy and wisdom, not just from his family, but from the land itself.
That evening, Samuel and Ahioka sat outside, sharing a simple meal of roasted vegetables, bread, and fresh milk. The air was filled with the scents of the garden and the faint hum of insects settling in for the night. Celebration. Samuel felt a deep sense of peace. Life on the ranch had always been hard, but now it was also full of meaning, companionship, and purpose. "You have changed more than the land," Samuel said quietly, breaking the comfortable silence.
Breath. You have changed me.
Ahioka smiled, her dark eyes reflecting the last rays of the sun. "And you have shown me that tradition and progress can coexist," she said.
Breath. That work, respect, and care can create something lasting. Together, we make the land stronger, and in doing so, we make ourselves stronger too.
As the stars began to emerge, Samuel realized that he had come to see Ahioka not just as a helper or partner in work, but as someone who had become an integral part of his life.
Her wisdom, patience, and respect for the land had reshaped not only the ranch, but his understanding of legacy, partnership, and the future.
The nights became a time of reflection, where Samuel and Ahioka would sit together under the vast expanse of the plains, listening to the wind and watching the stars. They shared stories of their ancestors, of challenges overcome, and of lessons learned. Samuel spoke of his father and grandfather, the hardships they had endured, and the values they had imparted. Ahioka shared stories of her people, the traditions that had been passed down through generations, and the ways they had learned to live in harmony with the land. Through these evenings, Samuel understood the depth of her earlier words. "Let your lineage sprout in me."
It was no longer just a promise, it was a living reality.
The lessons of his family, his work, and his values were taking root in Ahioka's care, and together they were nurturing something that would endure far beyond either of their individual lives. The bond between them grew stronger with each passing day. There was a quiet joy in their shared work, a sense of accomplishment in the small victories, and a profound respect for one another. They laughed together when mistakes were made, celebrated successes with quiet pride, and comforted each other during moments of fatigue or frustration. The ranch had become more than a place of work. It had become a home, a sanctuary, and a symbol of harmony between tradition and innovation, independence and partnership. As spring gave way to summer, Samuel found himself reflecting on the changes that had come into his life since Ahioka's arrival. He realized that the ranch, the land, and even his own heart had grown in ways he could never have anticipated. The work remained demanding, but it was now filled with purpose, companionship, and hope. And in the quiet evenings under the endless sky, he felt the profound truth of their shared journey. Life, like the land, flourished when nurtured with care, respect, and trust. For the first time in years, Samuel Carter felt not only proud of his land but also deeply connected to it, to the people who had come before him, and to the woman who had become a partner in every sense of the word, narration. Together, they were not only caretakers of the ranch, but also stewards of a legacy, one that honored the past while embracing the future. Summer had settled fully over the plains, turning the grass a deep, vibrant green, and filling the air with the scent of wild flowers and fresh earth. The ranch thrived like never before. The animals were healthy and content, the fences strong and the gardens abundant. Samuel Carter moved through the property with a quiet pride, his work lighter not because it was easier, but because it had become shared, meaningful, and deeply rewarding. Ahioka moved alongside him, as she had for months now, her presence steady and calm. Together they had created not just a ranch that worked efficiently, but a home filled with life, respect, and purpose. Samuel often thought back to the day she had first appeared on his land, carrying nothing but a small bundle and quiet determination. He remembered the cautious skepticism he had felt and the flicker of intuition that told him to trust her. Death. That decision had changed everything. It was a warm afternoon when Samuel realized just how far they had come. They were repairing a section of fencing that had been damaged by a recent summer storm. Ahioka knelt to examine the posts carefully, her hands skilled and deliberate. Samuel worked beside her, hammering the boards into place, adjusting the wire and checking each nut for strength. The work was familiar, but it felt different now, lighter, more satisfying, and infused with shared effort and mutual understanding. "You know," Samuel said, pausing to wipe sweat from his brow, "I never thought I'd say this, but I cannot imagine doing this work alone anymore."
Ahioka smiled gently, brushing dirt from her hands. "It is easier when hearts and hands work together," she said.
And the land notices when care is shared. It responds to attention, respect, and patience.
Samuel nodded, thinking of all the changes that had taken place. The ranch had grown stronger, more productive, and more beautiful under their combined care. But it wasn't just the land that had flourished. It was their bond, their understanding, and their shared vision of what life could be. That evening, as the sun dipped low over the horizon, casting long shadows across the plains, Samuel and Ahioka sat on the porch and watched the cattle graze peacefully. The air was warm, filled with the quiet hum of insects settling in for the night, and the distant calls of birds returning to their nests. It was a perfect moment, one that Samuel felt in his bones as a culmination of all the days, weeks, and months they had spent together. "I think the ranch is thriving more than ever," Samuel said, his voice calm but filled with a quiet pride. "And I realize now that it is not just because of the work. It is because of how we have worked together, how we have learned from each other." Ahioka nodded. "Yes. The land thrives when it is understood. People thrive when they are trusted and respected. And legacy thrives when it is shared."
Her words reminded Samuel of the promise she had made months ago. "Let your lineage sprout in me."
He thought about the lessons of his father and grandfather, the stories, traditions, and values that had been passed down through generations.
And now, through Ahioka, those lessons lived on, growing and spreading in new and meaningful ways. It was more than he could have imagined. As summer moved on, their connection with the surrounding community also grew. People who had once whispered or questioned their choices began to approach with curiosity and respect. They came to see the thriving gardens, the healthy livestock, and the harmony between Samuel and Ahioka. Some asked to learn their methods, others simply admired the care and effort evident in every corner of the ranch. One afternoon, a group of children from the town visited, led by the same young boy who had come weeks ago. They were eager to learn about the land, the animals, and the ways Samuel and Ahioka had managed to make the ranch flourish. Samuel showed them the fences, the garden, and the water system, while Ahioka explained the importance of patience, observation, and respect for every living thing. "Why do you care so much about every plant and animal?" one child asked, watching her carefully tie a small knot on a fence post. Ahioka smiled at the question. "Because everything has a story," she said. "The plants, the animals, the earth itself, they all carry lessons. To care for them is to honor those lessons. To listen to them is to understand life more fully." Samuel looked on, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. He realized that the ranch had become more than a home or a business. It had become a place of learning, a place where respect for the land and for one another could be passed down to the next generation. In this way, the legacy of his family, his land, and now Ahioka's wisdom would continue to grow and thrive long after he was gone. Evenings were their time for reflection. After the children left, Samuel and Ahioka would sit together under the stars, sharing stories of the past and hopes for the future. Samuel spoke of his ancestors, the struggles they had endured, and the lessons they had left behind. Ahioka shared her people's stories, the traditions that had guided her, and the ways she had learned to live in harmony with the land.
Through these quiet moments, Samuel realized that he had not only found a partner in work but a companion in life.
Ahioka's presence had transformed his understanding of family, legacy, and community. She had shown him that heritage was not only carried in blood, but also in action, respect, and care. Promise she had made to let his lineage sprout in her was alive and thriving, seen in the way they nurtured the land, guided the young, and worked together as equals. One evening, after a particularly long day, Samuel watched Ahioka tending the small garden they had started near the house. The sun was setting, casting golden light across her face. She paused to gently water the young plants, speaking softly as she worked. Samuel felt a profound sense of gratitude. He realized that life on the ranch was no longer just about survival or work. It was about growth, partnership, and the enduring power of respect and trust. "You have made this ranch more than I could have imagined," Samuel said, his voice quiet but full of feeling. Ahioka looked up, her dark eyes meeting his.
And you have taught me that wisdom and care can grow in many ways, she said.
Together we make the land stronger, and in doing so, we make ourselves stronger too. As the months turned into years, their bond deepened even further. The ranch continued to flourish, becoming a symbol of harmony between tradition and progress, between independence and partnership. Samuel and Ahioka worked tirelessly, yet their efforts were balanced with moments of quiet reflection, laughter, and shared stories. They learned from each other every day, their understanding growing as naturally as the plants in the garden.
The surrounding community began to see them as a model of cooperation and respect.
People who had once doubted them now visited for advice, inspired by the thriving ranch and the partnership that made it possible. Samuel found himself sharing lessons not just about ranching, but about patience, listening, and the value of trust. Ahioka's wisdom, once mysterious and poetic, became tangible, offering guidance to all who came seeking it. Through it all, Samuel never forgot the words Ahioka had spoken on that first day. "Let your lineage sprout in me." They were no longer just words. They were a living truth. The lessons, traditions, and values he had inherited from his family had taken root in her care, and together they had grown something enduring, meaningful, and alive. One quiet evening, as they sat under the stars, Samuel realized that he had come full circle. He had started as a solitary man, living a predictable and often lonely life on the ranch. Through Ahioka's presence, he had discovered a deeper understanding of legacy, partnership, and purpose. He had learned that life was richer when shared, that wisdom was strongest when nurtured, and that the land itself could teach lessons that went beyond work or survival.
Ahioka rested her head on his shoulder, and Samuel felt a profound sense of peace.
Breaths. Together, they had created not just a thriving ranch, but a living story, a story of respect, trust, and growth. It was a story that would continue, not only through their care, but through the lessons they had passed to others, the children they had taught, and the land they had nurtured. The plains stretched endlessly before them, golden under the setting sun, and Samuel knew that the legacy of his family, now intertwined with Ahioka's wisdom, would endure far beyond their lifetimes. The ranch was more than a place. It was a testament to what could happen when hearts and hands worked together, when respect and care guided actions, and when trust allowed lineage and wisdom to sprout in unexpected and extraordinary ways. And as night fell over the plains, Samuel felt a quiet certainty settle within him. Life had given him more than he had ever imagined. A partner, a companion, a living connection to the past, and a future filled with promise. Ahioka had not only become part of the ranch but part of his life, carrying forward a legacy of wisdom, respect, and enduring care. Together they had created something timeless, a living testament to the power of trust, partnership, and the quiet beauty of the land. In the stillness of the night, surrounded by the vast plains and the soft rustle of the wind, Samuel whispered to himself, "We have made it together." And he knew, without doubt, that the story they had begun would continue to grow, flourish, and inspire for generations to come.